Hi and welcome to my channel. This week we're going to be talking about one of the most tragic stars of Hollywood. Her name was Frances Farmer, and she went from being an absolutely gorgeous, rising star, one of the biggest stars supposedly, to this. Let's find out what happened to Frances Farmer. Hi everyone and welcome to my page, Tragic Hollywood on the Town. I know I've been missing, but I'm back with another tragic tale of the week. And this week we're going to be talking about Frances Farmer. She barely made it famous before circumstances took her down, and I mean really down. And the circumstances were not all in her control, which was really tragic. So before we get into Frances Farmer, if you like my content, please like and subscribe. But most importantly, please watch the entire video because I need the watched hours. And if you don't watch the video, I don't get the watched hours. And I have a lot of, surprises at the end of these videos. So maybe you want to watch the whole video. That's my spiel. And now we're going to get into Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer, if you'll recall, maybe some of you are Nirvana fans. She was made famous in Kurt Cobain's song, Frances Farmer Will Get Her Revenge. She was born in the same town that Kurt Cobain was born in. She was born in Seattle, Washington, much earlier, 1913. And she was a Seattle girl, and she never really... She owned up to Seattle. She loved Seattle. When she went back there, she was treated like Queen Elizabeth. She was treated like royalty, even though her personal life in Hollywood was crashing and burning. So she was born in 1913 into turbulent circumstances. Her mother and father were not getting along, and at a certain point, her mother took her and her siblings and moved all the way down to Chico, California, Southern California area, and she attempted to get work and also try to support her kids, but this proved too much for the mom, so she told her father's sister to come and pick these kids up because she couldn't handle it. So the aunt came and picked them up and brought them back to Seattle to live with the father. Well, the mother ended up going completely bankrupt and moving back in with the family in 1929. And this was awkward, to say the least, because she'd been estranged from her husband for an entire year. So she ended up moving back in with her husband. And this led for some pretty awkward moments. Awkward living situation all around for Frances Farmer. She was smart. She loved the idea of drama. She gained some measure of fame by writing an anti-God article, Nietzsche-inspired article, arguing against the existence of God because she said she couldn't find him anywhere in her life, so he must not be around. And this actually gained her a little bit of national fame, of her 15 minutes of fame, so to speak. So that's how she initially gained fame. After high school, she enrolled in the University of Washington, where she became involved in drama. She was a very good actress. She also became involved in leftist politics. She began selling magazine subscriptions for a leftist publication, and she sold so many subscriptions that she won a free trip to Moscow. So, yay, free trip to Moscow. Of course, this was long before the Red Scare and commie this and commie that. This was in the early 1930s, when actual leftist politics and communism wasn't viewed in the same way as it's viewed now. But on her way back from Moscow, she stopped in New York, and this was where she decided she was going to try to make a career on the stage. But she never got the chance because a Paramount scout spotted her, and because she had this amazing bone structure and this chiseled, beautiful features, he dragged her to Hollywood, made her do a screen test, and then Paramount signed her immediately because she was so stunning looking. And not only was she stunning looking, she could also really act. So she thus began her rather short-lived career in Hollywood. But she did make a splash in Hollywood, and she made several movies with some pretty big co-stars. On her third picture, this was an A-class picture, co-starring one of the biggest stars of the time, Bing Crosby, and it was called Rhythm on the Range, and it was about a rich heiress who runs away from her wedding and gets hooked up with an Arizona cowboy, a singing cowboy, and so they have a romance, and it's kind of a silly plot line, but it might have been trying to capitalize on the success of the other movie at that time with a similar plot called It Happened One Night with Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable. So it had kind of a similar plot line, and it was a successful movie, and she was top billed in that movie right alongside one of the biggest stars in Hollywood of the day. So she was well on her way to establishing herself in Hollywood. She was cast in 2 more films that were where she was star billed. One was A Toast of New York, and that was with Cary Grant. And the other one was with Joel McCrea, and it was called Come and Get It. And these movies were really successful, and she did well in them, and she was considered a star at this point because she was working with top directors in top films at a top studio. So she pretty much had it made in Hollywood at this point. But the problem with Frances Farmer was she didn't want to play the Hollywood game. She refused to play the publicity game. She would be reclusive and stay in her mansion. Not even a mansion. It was like a mid-sized house in the Hollywood Hills up there. She would, rather than socialize at these glittering Hollywood parties or going to the glittering nightclubs of the day, showing herself in the nightclubs and posing for photographs for photographers who always hung out at these places, she didn't play that game. She was not interested. She was interested in being a good actress. She was interested in promoting herself as an actress, not as a glamorous movie star. And the studio became frustrated with this. They weren't used to this kind of star. They were used to stars who sought attention from the media, good attention anyway. They were used to stars who partied all night at these glamorous nightclubs like Chasen's and the Macombo and places like that. I mean, she refused to do any of these things. She had no interest in going to parties. She had no interest in going clubbing. She would simply stay in her home and was rather reclusive. So this presented a problem for Paramount because they kept having to make excuses for why whenever she did show up in public, she was glammed down. She was not dressed. She was wearing slacks and her hair tangled. And I mean, she did not look like a glamorous movie star. Fed up with Hollywood trying to make her toe the line as a glamorous movie star, she moved back to New York. And because she was already a well-known name, she was cast in a production of Golden Boy, based on Clifford Odets' play. It's famous play, and they made it into a movie. But she was cast as the romantic lead in Golden Boy. And because she was well-known, this became the most successful production of Clifford Odets and the left-wing commie playwrights production in New York at the time. Many people were a member of the group who later got in trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee. But anyway, this play was very successful, and she did very well in it. But her problem was she fell in love with Odette, even though she was married to someone else at the time, and he was married. And then the affair ended when the play went on the road and we decided to do a tour in London. And Odette replaced her with a woman, a wealthy woman who was an actress, an aspiring actress, but she was wealthy enough to provide a lot of money for funding to produce this play abroad. So because she had deep pockets and Frances didn't, she was replaced. Well, Odette replaced her, and that was the end of that affair. And she returned to Hollywood a little bit dejected and heartbroken. But Hollywood was calling the shots now. Paramount took her back, of course, because she was still a star, but they didn't cast her in the best role. She was cast in 2 B pictures. One of her co-stars was John Garfield, who's in my second book. and was a fellow group member. And the other one was called Pogo Pogo. None of these did very well at the box office. And because Frances continued to be a pain in the ass for Paramount because she wouldn't play the game, so to speak, they got fed up and canceled her contract. Her husband also filed for divorce. And when the divorce was final, he married his girlfriend the same day that the divorce was final. So, ouch. I don't know, maybe Frances kind of deserved that. She had clearly cheated on him with Odette. And so I don't really feel that sorry for her in that regard. But the canceling of Paramount contract was a big deal for her. She was out of options at this point. She was out of her living. She was pretty low at this point. And I think it clicked. Something clicked in her. And this is when she began to show mental instability. She had a few drunk driving incidents where she was mostly let off with a warning. Her drinking had definitely increased, and her behavior had become pretty erratic. But a series of events was about to take place that would result in Frances leaving Hollywood forever. And the tragedies that occurred as a result of these events were some of the most tragic to ever happen to a movie star in Hollywood. So let's take a look at these events. While in Mexico to film an independent film, Frances Farmer was arrested for drunk driving. She was then summarily kicked out of the country. When she returned to her Laurel Canyon mansion, she found it empty of all of her belongings and strangers living there. She had not been paying the rent. Paramount had not been paying the rent, and she had been evicted, and her mother and sister-in-law had removed her belongings and put them in storage to keep them safe. But Frances saw this as an abject betrayal, so she was livid when she found this out. And then she was arrested, or a warrant was issued for her arrest for failing to pay the rest of her DUI fine that she had gotten a few months ago in America. It was like $250, and it's not really clear why she didn't pay it. She had that money, but she failed to pay it. So no place to live. She started living at the Knickerbocker Hotel, which is just off Hollywood Boulevard, and it's still there, by the way. And she was living in the Knickerbocker Hotel when the sheriffs came by and demanded to arrest her because there's a warrant for her arrest for not paying her $250 DUI fine. So she refused to come out of her room. They broke into it. She was literally hauled through the hallways, down the staircase, and through the lobby of the Knickerbocker Hotel, kicking and screaming. She was photographed like this. There happened to be a photographer there from one of the publications, and he was snapping pictures when this happened. When this hit the papers the following day, it was game over for Frances Farmer. She looked absolutely terrible, disheveled. She looked like she was hammered, which she was. She spent the entire time at the Knickerbocker just drinking and getting drunk. And so this resulted in pretty much the end of her Hollywood career over this one incident. So I'm going to read to you. This is from my new book. I'm going to read to you this paragraph that details what happened when she went to court the following day. At her hearing the following morning, after she once again spent a night in jail, the drama continued. She yelled out of turn that her civil rights had been violated, threw an inkwell at the judge, then ran to a phone booth, presumably to try and call an attorney. In the process, she knocked down a police officer and bruised a matron and another officer before finally being brought under control and thrown back in her jail cell. The judge was so incensed that he slapped her with a 180-day jail sentence. Fortunately for Frances, her sister-in-law was a deputy sheriff for LA County, a rare thing back then in those days for a woman to be a deputy sheriff. And she was able to have Frances removed from jail and placed in a psychiatric ward of LA County General. Fortunately, this started a series of hospitalizations for Frances that were truly draconian for their day and would result in her pretty much losing what little was left of her mind. So this became a really sad event. She was given a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and there was a really barbaric treatment back then. She was at a facility in La Crescenta called the Kimball Sanatorium in La Crescenta, California. She received a treatment at this facility in which she was given enough insulin to cause her to go into a coma. And this supposedly was supposed to reset her broken brain. They also gave her shock treatment. Again, back then, they believed that shocking your brain, shocking a person's broken, malfunctioning brain, would reset it. Now they use shock treatment more sparingly and more subtly to help people with severe depression. So it's still being used, but a lot differently than it was back then. And she lost big chunks of her memory from both of these treatments. While she was at this facility in La Crescenta, her mother came down and petitioned to the court to take guardianship over Frances. And against doctor's orders, she removed Frances from this institution and she brought her back home to live with her in Seattle. Bad idea, because Frances wasn't stable. She wasn't in any. You simply can't live with somebody who is bipolar or schizophrenic or both, and you can't get them stable. It's impossible to live with someone like that. So eventually, she reinstitutionalized her in a notorious state facility, and this place was called Western State Hospital in Steilacoon, Washington. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. This was in 1944. This place was horrible. I mean, Snake Pit doesn't even come close to describing this place. Frances claims she was lobotomized here, but there is zero evidence of this. I don't think she had a lobotomy. She was probably abused here, both physically and possibly sexually. But I do not believe that she had a lobotomy. After receiving shock treatments at this facility, she was declared cured. Probably they just didn't want to deal with her anymore, so they released her to her family. Her father took her on a road trip, thinking that if she spent time in Nevada on her aunt's farm out there, that she would do better than if she was in the city environment. But she ran away during this road trip, and I'm going to read a little something from my new book. On a road trip with her father to visit her aunt, who lived on a ranch near Reno, Nevada, Frances ran away. She was found hitchhiking by a family who took her in, but she eventually left them and ended up in Antioch, California, where she spent 3 days wandering around aimlessly, penniless, wearing overalls and a man's work shirt. She was fined $10 and thrown in the town jail, to await her father. He picked her up and dropped her off at her aunt's house as planned, where she spent several months before returning to her parents' home. Again, things did not go well because she did not have an ongoing treatment plan. There weren't a lot of drugs actually to treat mental illness at this time. I don't think the drugs began coming, especially the ones we have now, until around the 50s and 60s. So really there wasn't that much treatment. So she became unruly again, and she was reinstitutionalized in the same horrible place once again. She was made a ward of the state, and she would spend the next 5 horrible years in Western State facility. The horror, she described true horrors in her autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning? Including the lobotomy, but there are no records of her. And there were plenty of people that got lobotomized, and they had no problem talking about it. But she was never on the list of people who received a lobotomy. Nurses who worked there and who were interviewed later said did not receive a lobotomy. But she was abused. She claimed to have been raped, which is probably true. She claimed that she was forced to eat her own feces. She claimed a lot of things. Yeah. This is horrible for her. My heart breaks for her, because truly barbaric conditions at this hospital that was disgusting and overcrowded, and yeah, it was a pretty horrible place. She was released on the condition that she could be readmitted at any time at the request of her mother, Lillian. She was released into the custody of her mother. She was so terrified of this that she maintained a courteous and a demure behavior with her mother for 3 solid years, even though her full civil rights were reinstated a year after her release. Needless to say, that her relationship with her mother became pretty strained after that. She took a position as a laundress in a hotel that had once welcomed her as the big movie star girl, hometown girl made good. This is a hotel in Seattle. She took a position as a laundress there. And of course, when people found out she was working as a laundress, they couldn't get enough of that. She managed to squeeze 2 more marriages in. She married a utility worker that she met at the Olympic Hotel, and both he and her moved in with her mother, who began to show signs of dementia and deteriorating health. And she was there for her mother when she died, despite the bad blood between them. So then she divorced this guy, and she met a man who was a radio promoter. And his name, if I can find it, Leland C. McCassell, and he was a radio promoter, and he convinced her to move to San Francisco with him and take a job as a receptionist at the Sheraton Hotel in San Francisco. And it's believed he knew she would be recognized, and of course she was recognized at this hotel. And so the press went into overdrive. Beautiful former movie star Frances Farmer now working as a receptionist in San Francisco at a hotel. So he thought he could parlay this into some sort of new career revival for Frances Farmer. A reporter from Modern Screen magazine saw her and decided to write an article on her life. And due to the publicity from this article, she appeared on television. For the first time, she appeared in front of an audience. She came up poised. She was willing to answer questions. Are you an alcoholic? No, I'm not an alcoholic. Yeah, these type of things. It's totally in denial. But she came off poised. She didn't come off like a lunatic. She came off perfectly poised and calm and intelligent. And she was calm and intelligent. She appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show and This Is Your Life. And if you ever saw like old reruns of This Is Your Life, it's a sort of a interviewer where the person sits down and is interviewed about their life, and then people from their life, from their past, come out and tell their story about how they met that person. And seemed to work for her. She seemed to really be emotional and happy, and she was back in front of an audience and she was getting paid. So she made her final film, The Party Crushers, in 1958. It was kind of a fluffy film and it wasn't really well received. She was offered her own television series. It was called Frances Farmer Presents, and she was supposed to come on and talk about the movie that was being shown before the movie was shown, and then wrap things up afterwards. But because she never really stopped drinking, they decided to can her from this production, because she would show up to the set hammered. And yeah, that didn't work, especially in 1960s television. So she was fired from that in 1964. In the 1970s, she began working on her autobiography. She had made several recordings and was working with a ghostwriter. It was called Will There Really Be a Morning? And A lot of the stuff in there was fiction. She spiced it up for sure, but there was enough real, true horror about what happened to her at Western State that it got a lot of people's attention. This book was not cobbled together until after her death. The ghostwriter cobbled it together and put it out after her death, and it sold very well. She began living with a woman. Her name was Jean Ratcliffe. She converted to Catholicism and became a very important part of her life, her later life. She gave up drinking, finally, but she never gave up the cigs, and she died on August 4th, 1970, of esophageal cancer. She was the very definition of tragic Hollywood, beautiful, glamorous, and dead, Frances Farmer. She had such a gift. She was a true actress. She was beautiful. She had it all, but unfortunately, Hollywood is insidious and has a way of affecting you negatively. And that's what happened to Frances Farmer. She just wasn't strong enough to endure the slings and arrows that Hollywood can throw at you. So, R.I.P. to Frances Farmer, who's appearing in my third book, which will be out at some point. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope you like and subscribe. And if you made it this far, thank you so much. I really appreciate you actually watching the video. I'm going to plug my books, Tragic Hollywood, Beautiful, Glamorous, and Dead, Tragic Hollywood, Beautiful, Glamorous, and Still Dead, and my novel, Goodbye Angel, Goodbye, When Dreams Aren't Enough. We will hopefully see you next week. Thank you.